My name is Vivian Carter, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that my own mother-in-law would almost destroy my father's company without ever signing a single contract herself, I would have laughed in their face. I thought corporate takeovers happened in movies. I thought family betrayal only happened to other people. I was wrong. Looking back now, I can tell you the exact moment everything started to fall apart. But at the time, it looked so ordinary that I completely ignored it. That's the scary part about betrayal. It rarely kicks the front door down. It quietly walks in, smiles at you, and waits until you're comfortable enough to stop paying attention. My father, Samuel Carter, built Carter Industrial Systems from a tiny warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. He started with 3 employees, an old pickup truck, and more determination than money. 28 years later, the company employed nearly 400 people and supplied equipment to some of the biggest manufacturers in the country. Growing up, I practically lived inside that building. After school, I'd finish my homework in Dad's office while he worked late into the night. Every employee knew my name, and my father treated every single one of them like family. He always told me, "A business isn't built by machines, Vivian. It's built by people you can trust." For years, I believed he was right. Then I married Ethan Holloway. At first, Ethan was everything I thought I wanted. Smart, patient, successful, and incredibly supportive. His mother, Margaret Holloway, was just as charming. She baked pies for holidays, remembered everyone's birthdays, and somehow always knew exactly what to say. People loved her. Even my father admired her. She never asked for money. She never asked for a position in the company. She simply offered helpful advice. Looking back, that's what made her so dangerous. She never looked like someone trying to take control. She looked like someone who genuinely cared. A year after our wedding, strange things started happening at Carter Industrial Systems. New employees were being hired faster than ever before. Every department suddenly had fresh faces. Human resources said they were simply keeping up with the company's growth, and honestly, it made sense. Business was booming. Nobody questioned it, not even me. Every time I asked where these people came from, the answers were always simple. Excellent resumes. Strong recommendations. Perfect interviews. Nothing seemed unusual. Until I realized those same new employees always seemed to know confidential information before anyone else did. One afternoon, I walked into a meeting that had been moved without anyone telling me. 3 managers immediately stopped talking the moment I entered. They exchanged quick glances before pretending everything was normal. I laughed it off. Companies have private discussions all the time. But later that evening, my assistant quietly admitted something that stayed in my mind for weeks. "Vivian, have you noticed something strange?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before lowering her voice. The new employees, they all seemed to know each other. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe they'd worked together before. Maybe they came from the same recruiting agency. It wasn't enough to worry about. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. That night, while Ethan was taking a shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. I only looked because the screen lit up with one familiar name. Margaret. The message contained only one sentence. "Employee number 27 starts Monday." "Don't tell Vivian yet." I stared at the screen. Employee number 27? 27 of what? Before I could think any further, Ethan walked into the kitchen, saw the phone in my hand, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. Instead of explaining the message, Ethan quietly took his phone back, looked me straight in the eyes, and said 5 words that made my blood run cold. "Please, don't ask about this." I stood there staring at Ethan, waiting for him to laugh and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he slipped his phone into his pocket, kissed my forehead, and quietly walked upstairs. That bothered me more than if he'd yelled. Ethan had never hidden anything from me before. For the rest of the night, he barely spoke. Every time I tried bringing up the text message, he'd change the subject. Finally, just before we went to bed, he turned toward me and said, "Vivian, sometimes the less you know, the safer you are." Then he switched off the lamp. I lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling, wondering why my own husband suddenly sounded like he was protecting me from something I couldn't even see. The next morning, I arrived at Carter Industrial Systems earlier than usual. The parking lot was almost empty, but one thing immediately caught my attention. 7 of our newest employees arrived within 2 minutes of each other. They weren't carpooling. They drove separate vehicles. Yet they all parked in the same corner of the lot, walked inside together, and never once looked surprised to see one another. It wasn't the kind of behavior you'd expect from people who supposedly came from different companies and different states. It looked organized. I decided to do something I had never done before. I asked our human resources director for the hiring records of every employee hired during the last 3 years. She smiled politely but looked strangely uncomfortable. "Mr. Carter usually approves those requests." I frowned. "I'm vice president." "I know. Then why do I need my father's permission?" She hesitated just long enough to make my stomach tighten. "It's a new policy." "A new policy? Who approved it?" She looked down at her desk before answering. "The executive committee." I almost laughed. I sit on the executive committee. She couldn't even look me in the eyes. Apparently, not anymore. I felt my heartbeat speed up. Nobody had removed me from the committee. At least, nobody had told me. I walked straight to my father's office. Samuel Carter looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes I'd never seen before. He was staring at financial reports scattered across his desk. "Dad?" He looked up and forced a smile. "Morning." "Sweetheart." I closed the door behind me. When was I removed from the executive committee? His smile disappeared. "What are you talking about?" I explained what HR had just told me. My father immediately picked up the phone and called corporate administration. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Finally, he slammed the receiver onto the desk. I never approved that. A strange silence filled the room. Then, he quietly admitted something that shocked me even more. "Vivian, I haven't approved a lot of things." Lately, I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He slowly opened a folder filled with board meeting minutes. Almost every page carried his digital signature, except he hadn't signed any of them. "Dad, these are forged." He nodded. "I know." My entire body went cold. Someone wasn't just making decisions inside the company. Someone was making them in my father's name. Before either of us could say another word, his executive assistant rushed into the office without knocking. "Mr. Carter, you need to come to conference room A." "Why?" "The board is voting." My father frowned. "Voting on what?" She swallowed hard. "They're voting to replace the CEO. Silence. Complete." Silence. My father looked at me. I looked back at him. Neither of us had been informed there was even a board meeting today. As we hurried toward the conference room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every single person walking into that room was one of the company's newest employees. I counted them: 1, 5, 9, 15, 20, 27, exactly. The same number from Margaret's text message. Then I saw the last person enter the boardroom. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't a shareholder. She wasn't even supposed to be inside the building. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret Holloway. She smiled at me through the glass door, like she'd been expecting me all along. When the boardroom doors locked behind her, I realized this wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of a takeover my family never saw coming. The moment the boardroom doors locked, I knew this wasn't a normal meeting. My father reached for the handle, but it wouldn't move. Through the glass walls, I watched Margaret Holloway calmly take a seat at the far end of the table like she belonged there. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't pretending anymore. She looked confident, almost relieved. It was the expression of someone who had spent years waiting for this exact moment. I turned toward the receptionist standing nearby. "Unlock the door." She looked at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. Board members only." I stared at her in disbelief. "My father is the CEO." She lowered her eyes. "Not for much longer." Dad finally forced the door open using his security badge. The entire room fell silent. Around the table sat 27 employees I'd barely known a year ago. Human resources, finance, legal, IT, operations, procurement, every department was represented. They weren't sitting randomly either. They were seated according to voting power. My father slowly looked around the room before asking one simple question. "Who called this meeting?" No one answered. Then Margaret folded her hands on the table and smiled. "I did." My father frowned. "You don't work here." Margaret didn't even blink. "No. But people who trust me do." I watched my father's face change. For the first time in my life, he looked completely lost. The company's corporate attorney cleared his throat before sliding a thick binder across the table. "Mr. Carter, according to our records, the board legally approved today's emergency vote last week." My father flipped through the pages. Every signature looked authentic. Mine was there too. I had supposedly approved the meeting, except I had never even seen those documents before. "These signatures are forged," I said loudly. The attorney remained calm. "If that's true, you'll have to prove it." Margaret leaned back in her chair, almost amused by the conversation. "Vivian," she said softly, "you always were too emotional." I looked directly at her. "What do you want?" She smiled. "I want stability." "No." "You want control." She didn't deny it. Instead, she slowly stood and walked toward the massive window overlooking my father's factory floor. Hundreds of employees were working below, completely unaware that the future of the company was being decided above their heads. "You know what your father never understood?" she asked. I stayed silent. He built an incredible company, but he trusted the wrong people. I almost laughed. "The wrong people? You're talking about yourself." Margaret turned toward me. "No, I'm talking about everyone else." She pointed around the room. "Every successful business is controlled from the inside, not from the outside." Those words hit me like a punch. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The new hires, the strange promotions, the missing meetings, the forged approvals. It had never been about replacing one employee. It had been about replacing the entire decision-making system. Without anyone noticing, my father slowly whispered, "My God, you've been planning this for years." Margaret smiled proudly. 8 years. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. 8 years. She had started this plan before Ethan and I were even married. Before she'd become part of our family. Before she ever sat at our Thanksgiving table pretending to care about us. She hadn't married her son into our family. She had infiltrated ours. Before anyone could say another word, the company's chief financial officer suddenly entered the room carrying a sealed envelope. He walked straight past my father, straight past me, and handed it directly to Margaret. She opened it, smiled, and looked directly at me. "Congratulations, Vivian," I frowned. "For what?" She slid the document across the table. It was addressed to me. Across the top were 5 words that made my entire body go numb. Petition for immediate divorce. I looked up in disbelief. Ethan filed for divorce? Margaret nodded. This morning, my heart shattered. Then she quietly added one final sentence. "And according to your prenuptial agreement, everything begins today." As I reached for the divorce papers, I noticed a handwritten note inside the envelope. One sentence from Ethan that proved he wasn't the one really ending our marriage. Part 4. The divorce was never about love. Approx. 3 minutes voiceover, paragraph format only. I couldn't feel my hands anymore. The words petition for immediate divorce blurred in front of my eyes. For a moment, I forgot we were standing inside a boardroom. I forgot about the company. I forgot about the takeover. All I could think was, why? Ethan and I had argued before, like every married couple does, but divorce had never been mentioned. Not once. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Margaret watched me carefully, almost enjoying every second of my confusion. Inside was a handwritten note. Not typed, not printed. Handwritten. It was Ethan's handwriting. There were only 8 words. Don't fight it. It's the only way. I read the sentence 3 times. It didn't sound like a husband ending his marriage. It sounded like someone begging me to survive. Before I could understand what it meant, the company's attorney cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, according to your prenuptial agreement, your marital assets include 18% of Carter Industrial Systems. I looked up. So once the divorce is finalized, those shares must be immediately transferred into a family trust. My heart skipped. What family trust? The attorney calmly opened another document. Holloway Family Holdings. Felt sick, I looked at Margaret. You planned this? She smiled. No, I perfected it. Everything suddenly clicked. Together, the marriage, the timing, the 27 employees, the board meeting, the divorce. None of it was happening by coincidence. The divorce wasn't ending my marriage. It was activating a legal clause that would hand over almost 1/5 of my father's company without a single lawsuit, without anyone stealing a single share. It was all perfectly legal. My father slammed both hands onto the conference table. You manipulated my daughter. Margaret didn't even flinch. I offered your family opportunity. You handed it to me. Dad pointed directly at her. You used my daughter. Margaret slowly turned toward him. No, Samuel. Your daughter was simply the easiest door to open. Silence filled the room. I had never hated anyone the way I hated Margaret in that moment. Then the board secretary entered carrying another folder. She handed it directly to my father. His face immediately lost all color. Dad? He didn't answer. I walked around the table and looked down. The document was a bank. Notice. Carter Industrial Systems primary operating account had been frozen. Mullins. Unavailable. Transaction suspended pending. Federal review. What is this? Dad whispered. They froze payroll. My stomach dropped. Nearly 400 employees depended on those paychecks. If payroll didn't go through by Friday, families would lose rent money, mortgages wouldn't be paid. People would blame my father, not Margaret, exactly as she'd planned. Looked toward Margaret. Did you do this? She smiled. I didn't have to. People in the right places did. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number, I answered immediately. Whisper came through the speaker. Vivian, it was Ethan. His voice sounded terrified. You have exactly 20 minutes. For what? They're going after your father next. What are you talking about? I can't explain. You need to leave that building. Now. The line suddenly disconnected. Before I could move. 2 FBI agents walked into the boardroom. Every conversation stopped. One of them unfolded an official document, then looked directly at my father. Samuel Carter, you're under investigation for corporate fraud. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Father hadn't stolen from anyone. He'd spent 30 years building that company with honesty. Margaret quietly picked up her purse, smiled at me, and whispered just loudly enough for only me to hear. I told you, the company stopped belonging to your family a long time ago. As the FBI escorted my father out of his own company in handcuffs, I noticed one person secretly recording everything from across the hallway, and it wasn't one of the 27 employees. Watching my father being led through the lobby in handcuffs felt like living someone else's nightmare. Employees who had worked beside him for 20 years stood frozen, whispering as FBI agents escorted him toward the exit. Some looked shocked. Others looked prepared. That's when I noticed him. A man standing near the reception desk was quietly recording everything with his phone. He wasn't crying. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even pretending to care. The moment our eyes met, he immediately lowered the phone and walked away. Something inside me screamed that he wasn't just another employee. I pushed past 2 security guards and followed him into the parking garage. "Hey!" I shouted. He kept walking. "Stop!" Finally, he turned around. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a maintenance uniform with a company badge that read Michael Ross. I had never seen him before, yet according to his badge, he'd worked for Carter Industrial Systems for almost 6 years. "Why were you recording my father?" I demanded. He looked around to make sure nobody else was listening. Then he quietly said, "Because someone needs proof." My anger instantly turned into confusion. "Proof of what?" He stepped closer. "Your father didn't steal from this company. I know that. But I know who did." Before I could ask another question, he reached into his toolbox and handed me a small flash drive. "Don't open it here." "What is this?" "Evidence. Against who?" He looked directly into my eyes. "Against every one of those 27 employees." I grabbed his arm before he could leave. "If you know all this, why haven't you gone to the FBI?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "I already did." "What happened?" "They fired the agent." A cold chill ran through my body. "What?" Michael nodded. "They're everywhere, Vivian. They're inside the company. They're inside the banks. They're inside the courts." He paused before saying something that made my heart stop. "And they're inside the FBI." Before I could respond, 3 black SUVs suddenly entered the parking garage. Michael's expression changed immediately. "They found me." He shoved the flash drive into my hand. "Listen carefully. If anything happens to me, trust the accountant." "What accountant?" "The only one Margaret couldn't buy." Before I could ask his name, the SUV doors flew open. 4 men in black suits stepped out. Not wearing FBI jackets, not wearing police uniforms, just black suits. Michael looked at me one last time. "Run!" Without thinking, I sprinted behind a row of parked cars. I heard shouting, then a loud struggle. Then, silence. I looked back. The men were gone. The SUVs were gone. Michael was gone. The only thing left on the concrete floor was his company ID badge. I picked it up. Then I noticed something strange. The badge wasn't his. The photograph showed Michael's face, but the name underneath read Jonathan Pierce, a completely different identity. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was an unknown email. The subject line read, "Your father is innocent." Attached was one security video. The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m., exactly 3 nights earlier. I pressed play. The footage showed my father's private office. At first, nothing happened. Then the office door slowly opened. Margaret Holloway walked inside. She wasn't alone. Behind her walked Ethan, my husband. He unlocked my father's safe, removed a stack of confidential documents, and handed them directly to Margaret. I couldn't breathe. Ethan hadn't just known about the takeover. He had helped make it happen. Then the video froze. A final message appeared on the screen. "This isn't the full recording. Watch what Ethan does next." As the rest of the footage began playing, I realized Ethan wasn't stealing the documents. He was secretly replacing them with something Margaret never noticed. I couldn't stop staring at the security footage. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my phone. For the last 24 hours, I'd believed my husband had betrayed my family. I had watched him open my father's safe with his own hands. I had watched him hand confidential files to Margaret Holloway. But the video wasn't over. I forced myself to keep watching. Ethan carefully removed 3 blue folders from the safe and placed them on the desk. Margaret never looked inside them. She simply slipped them into her briefcase, convinced she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Then she answered a phone call and walked out of the office for less than 30 seconds. Ethan looked toward the hallway, made sure nobody was watching, and quickly opened another folder hidden beneath his jacket. Inside were completely different documents. He replaced every original file with fake financial reports. Then he quietly whispered to himself, "I'm sorry, Vivian." Before Margaret returned, Ethan locked the safe, picked up the fake documents, and calmly handed them back to her. She smiled, thanked him, and walked away without realizing she'd been deceived. I replayed the video 3 times. Ethan hadn't stolen my father's evidence. He had protected it. But why didn't he tell me? Before I could think any further, another email appeared. This time there was no subject line, only a single attachment. Voice recording UNJ 014 MP3I pressed play. The recording began with heavy breathing. Then Ethan's voice filled the speakers. "If you're listening to this, Vivian, it means everything has already fallen apart." My eyes filled with tears. "I know you're going to hate me. And honestly, I'd probably hate me too." There was a long pause. "I married you because I loved you. But my mother married me to your family." I stopped breathing. My entire life has been controlled by Margaret. When I was 22, she gave me one job: earn Samuel Carter's trust, become part of his family. And wait. I thought she only wanted business opportunities. I didn't know she was building an army inside the company. His voice cracked. The day I discovered the truth. I tried to stop her, but by then it was too late. The 27 employees already controlled every important department. I could hear him crying. The divorce was never my choice. They threatened you. They threatened your father. And they promised to kill both of you if I warned you. He took a deep breath. So I did the only thing I could. I started working against my own mother. Tears rolled down my face. For months, I'd believed Ethan had betrayed me. In reality, he'd been risking his life to protect us. The recording suddenly cut off. Then another voice appeared. Margaret, cold, calm. If you're hearing this, Ethan, you're already dead. The file ended. A wave of panic rushed through me. I immediately called Ethan. Straight to voicemail again. Voicemail again. Nothing. Then Daniel, my father's longtime accountant, called me for the first time in years. His voice was trembling. Vivian. I found the original shareholder records. My heartbeat exploded. Where are you? At the old accounting office. I'm coming. No. His voice became even quieter. Don't come here. They're already outside. I stood frozen. What? They know I found the evidence. I grabbed my car keys. Daniel, lock the doors. I'm calling the police. He laughed nervously. No, Vivian. You still don't understand. The police work for them too. The line suddenly went silent. Then I heard glass shatter. Someone yelling, a struggle, and finally, one loud gunshot. The call disconnected. I stared at my phone in complete shock. Then a text message appeared from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. You're the last Carter they haven't destroyed. Yet. As I looked up from my phone, I realized someone was sitting inside my car, waiting in the passenger seat. My heart nearly stopped. I slowly turned toward the passenger seat, expecting to see one of Margaret's men. Instead, I saw a young woman, maybe 30 years old, sitting perfectly still with both hands resting in her lap. She wasn't pointing a weapon at me. She wasn't threatening me. She simply looked exhausted. Before I could scream, she quietly said, "Please, drive." Every instinct told me to get out of the car, but something about her voice felt different. It wasn't confidence. It was fear. I locked the doors, started the engine, and pulled away from the parking lot without saying a word. After several blocks of complete silence, she finally spoke. "My name is Claire Dawson," I frowned. "Who are you?" She took a deep breath. "I used to be employee number 12. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "One of Margaret's 27? She nodded slowly. "For 6 years. I glanced at her. "Why are you telling me this now?" Tears filled her eyes. "Because I helped destroy innocent people, and I can't live with it anymore." I pulled into an empty gas station and turned off the engine. "Start talking." Claire looked down at her trembling hands. Margaret never hired people because they were qualified. She hired people because they were loyal. Every one of us owed her something. Some had debts she paid off. Some had criminal records she made disappear. Others, like me, had sick family members whose medical bills she covered. Claire swallowed hard. She never called it blackmail. She called it gratitude. I could finally see what Margaret had built. It wasn't a company takeover. It was a network of people who believed they owed her their lives. Claire reached into her purse and handed me a folded sheet of paper. It was a complete organizational chart of Carter Industrial Systems. 27 names were highlighted in red. Every single one matched a key department. 8. Finance, human resources, legal, purchasing, security, even my father's executive assistant. I felt physically sick. She controlled everything. Claire nodded. "Almost." I looked up. "What do you mean, almost?" She pointed toward one name that wasn't highlighted. "Daniel Brooks, chief accountant. Margaret tried to recruit him for 4 years," Claire whispered. "He refused every single time." My heart skipped a beat. Daniel, the accountant who had called me just before the gunshot. The only person Michael had told me to trust. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed his number again. Straight to voicemail. Again. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed with a news alert. "Breaking news, local accountant found dead in downtown office shooting." I couldn't breathe. There was no name yet. No photograph. Only the address. It was Daniel's office. Claire looked at the screen and slowly shook her head. "No, they're lying." I turned toward her. "What?" "They always report the death before they confirm the body." "Why?" "So nobody goes looking for the missing person." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're saying Daniel might still be alive?" She nodded. If Margaret wanted him dead, she would have made sure everyone believed he already was. At that exact moment, another envelope slid beneath my driver's side windshield wiper. Neither of us had seen anyone approach the car. I quickly stepped outside and picked it up. There was no address. No stamp, just my name. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed Daniel, alive, sitting in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, holding today's newspaper. Written across the bottom in black marker were 6 words. "Come alone if you want answers." Before I could process what I was seeing, Claire suddenly grabbed my arm so tightly it hurt. Her face had turned completely white. She wasn't looking at the photograph. She was staring across the street. I slowly followed her gaze. Parked beneath a broken streetlight was Ethan, standing beside his car. But he wasn't alone. Margaret was standing next to him. And from where I sat, it looked like they were hugging. The man I had just started believing again appeared to be standing with the woman who had destroyed my family, and I had no idea which betrayal was real. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Across the street, Ethan was standing only a few feet away from Margaret Holloway. From where I was sitting, it looked like they had just embraced. Every emotion I'd fought to control came rushing back at once. Anger, confusion, betrayal. Claire grabbed my arm before I could open the car door. "Don't," I pulled away. "I have to know." Without waiting for another word, I crossed the street. "Ethan!" Both of them turned toward me. Margaret smiled. The same cold, confident smile I'd grown to hate. Ethan looked completely different. His face was bruised. His lip was split. His left wrist was covered in fresh cuts. He wasn't standing beside Margaret by choice. Two men in black suits stepped out from behind the SUV, each pointing a concealed handgun at his back. Margaret looked directly at me. "I knew you'd come." I stared at Ethan. "Tell me the truth." He slowly nodded. "Everything you heard on the recording was true." Margaret laughed. "He still thinks honesty can save people." Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "Vivian, sign the transfer documents. I'll release your father." I looked at the papers. Company ownership, remaining family shares, everything. She wanted the last piece of Carter Industrial Systems. I slowly looked back at her. No, her smile disappeared. She nodded toward one of the men. Within seconds, another SUV pulled into the parking lot. The rear door opened. My father stepped out. His hands were tied. His face was bruised, but he was alive. "Dad!" He immediately shouted, "Don't sign anything." Margaret sighed. So stubborn. Then another vehicle arrived. The rear doors opened. Daniel Brooks stepped out, alive, the accountant. His hands were tied too. Margaret looked almost amused. "These are the last two people protecting your family. You choose. The company or them." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Ethan suddenly did something nobody expected. He shoved one of the armed men into Margaret. The gun fired. Chaos exploded across the parking lot. At the same moment, dozens of unmarked black SUVs surrounded the entire area. Federal agents stormed the scene from every direction. "Lie down! FBI! Drop your weapons!" Margaret's men barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed. Daniel smiled weakly. "I told you." Someone finally listened. It turned out Michael, whose real name was Jonathan Pierce, hadn't disappeared. He'd gone directly to the FBI's Internal Affairs Division, not the local office Margaret had corrupted, the highest office in Washington. For 6 months, they had secretly built a case against everyone involved. The flash drive, the recordings, the financial records, Daniel's shareholder documents, Claire's testimony, and Ethan's hidden evidence from inside Margaret's organization. Together, it exposed one of the largest corporate conspiracy networks in state history. Margaret Holloway was arrested on charges including corporate espionage, fraud, witness intimidation, racketeering, identity fraud, and conspiracy. 27 employees were arrested over the next 48 hours. Every one of them confessed. Not because they wanted to, but because Margaret had secretly kept evidence against all of them too. She had never trusted anyone, not even the people who worked for her. 3 months later, every charge against my father was officially dismissed. Carter Industrial Systems returned to our family. The stolen company shares were restored. Daniel became the new chief executive officer until my father retired. Claire entered witness protection and finally got the fresh start she'd been searching for. As for Ethan, the divorce papers were never finalized. He stood outside our house one evening holding nothing except a single white envelope. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know I never stopped choosing you." I looked at him for a long time. Trust isn't repaired in one conversation. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it never fully returns. But I also understood something I'd spent months refusing to accept. Not everyone standing beside the villain is the villain. Some people are simply trapped, waiting for the first chance to fight back. Today, my father still walks through Carter Industrial Systems every Friday morning. Not because he has to, because he enjoys seeing honest people doing honest work. And every time I walk through those doors, I remember something he told me when I was a little girl. A company isn't built with money. It's built with trust. We almost lost both, But in the end, trust came home. If this story kept you guessing until the very end, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe for more original family betrayal, revenge, and mystery stories. And turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next shocking twist. Tell me in the comments, at what moment did you realize Margaret's real plan wasn't the marriage, but the company? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next unforgettable story.